Hello, you're welcome. Last week we began looking at the scriptures and we talked about the doctrine of the inspiration of scripture, and we wrapped it up by saying that the scriptures are inspired of God, and what it means is that the very text of scripture are inspired of God. And we did say that the language in which the scripture was written is the subject for inspiration. So you have the Hebrew in the Old Testament and you have the Greek, generally speaking, in the New Testament. Do well to like this video, subscribe to this channel as we make progress. So, today we are going to be looking at Bible translations and the science behind Bible translations so that you can have confidence in the Bible and you can know that even though the Hebrew and the Greek is what is the subject for inspiration, what we have now is very, very, very close to what was originally written. So, the Old Testament was largely written in Hebrew, and a little bit of the Old Testament was written in Aramaic, and the New Testament was written in Greek. And these languages are the original language that are translated into what we have now. And because we're watching this video in English, translated into English. So we have the original language, which is Hebrew or Greek, and then we have the receptor language, which is Greek. And you know that in translating words from one language to another, there are a couple of things that come up. There are a couple of issues that you have. First of all, you have a distance between the language that was originally spoken, which is like Hebrew or Greek, and the language that you're translating it into. You have that distance. And because of that, there are certain things that you would note when you're making this translation. For example, there are certain jokes that were common 2,000 years ago or 1,500 years ago that are not common now. We do not understand them as jokes. There are certain slangs, there are certain words that were used in those times that we will not understand because we did not live in those times. This distance is very important because a lot of the scriptures were written into particular contexts. There were particular contexts where they were written into. And if you do not understand those contexts, you will not be able to do a proper work of interpretation or a proper work of translating what was written in that original language into the English language. Secondly, the proposition that is contained in one language must be the same proposition that is contained in another language. So the proposition is the information content of a statement. So you have, when you translate something from, say, Yoruba to English, what you translate is the proposition. So at the end of the day, you're going to have a Yoruba sentence and you're going to have an English sentence, but both of them are going to have the same proposition because you have done the work of translation. That's basically what it's about. Now, there are different styles of Bible translation. There is the word for word translation, whereby the translators go in and then they translate one word and replace it with the other word. So if they see this word in Hebrew, they would replace it with the English word for that, and they put it together to try to make sense of it. Then you have the thought for thought translation, where translators go in and what they do is that they try to find out what the text was saying, the thought that is conveyed in the text, and then they translate it into the English language in contemporary terms in ways that we can understand what was said then using our contemporary language. And then you also have what are called the free translations or the paraphrases. The paraphrases are basically people going into the text and saying what they think the text is saying. So they are freer translations than the word for word and the text for text. Now, the truth is that with Bible translation, it's a spectrum. So a lot of translators combine more than one style of translation. But then we can be sure, or we can have certainty, that a lot of these translation styles are safe because, number one, these translations are usually done by committees. It's not one person usually who sits down to do a Bible translation. You usually have a committee of people sitting down to do a Bible translation. And then you have the fact that these people are trained in the ancient languages, so they know how to do the translation in a way that retains the authentic thing that was said, but brings it to us in the language that we have. So you have, for example, you have the King James family. You have the New King James, you have the Old King James, you have the Modern King James, you have the KJV 2000. Those translations are in the King James family and they lean more towards a word-for-word translation. And then you have the NIV, you have the RSV, you have the CSB that lean more towards the thought for thought translation, and then you have some translations in the middle like the English Standard Version, the ESV, which combine both of those styles and put them together to bring their translation. For the paraphrases, you have the Message translation, you have the Passion translation. Basically paraphrases, and they lean more towards the paraphrase than towards the thought for thought translation. So you have some translations that are a mix of the thought for thought and the paraphrase. For example, you have the Living Bible, you have the New Living Translation. Even though that leans more towards the thought for thought, you have these in the middle, so that the Bibles that we use are usually a combination of many styles put together to bring out what was originally said to us. So we did say that what is inspired of God is the text. What was written is what is inspired. Do we have confidence to believe that what we have now approximates to what was written? Yes, we do. Part of the things that you would want to do as you engage the Bible and do Bible study is to ensure that you use different translations of the Bible, especially different translations of the Bible that are translated by different styles. For instance, if you are studying the Bible and you use the King James, the New King James, and the New American Standard Bible, you would have basically used 3 different translations but from the same family. So you basically have the same thing. But if you are using the NIV, the RSV, and the ESV, for example, you're going to be using 3 different translations, again from the same family. So what you want to do is you want to try to use different translations of the Bible that cut across the spectrum. So for example, if you use the King James, you use the NASB, and then you use the RSV and the English Standard Version, or use the NIV, you want to try to cut across the spectrum. So people use the New King James or the New American Standard Bible, they use the RSV, and then they use the NLT. That gives you a good spread over the Bible with respect to the different translation styles. And if you do that, you'll be sure that you are very close to what was originally said. Now, some people have made certain complaints and said that we've used certain Bibles and some certain verses of the Bible are missing, especially from the NIV. They said that these verses of the scripture are missing, we can't find them. Now, in order not to make this video very complex, I'm just going to say what it is in ways that you can understand. The Bibles that we have were translated from manuscripts. Now, some manuscripts are more reliable than the others, right? So the translators assessed the quality of the manuscripts, and there are various factors that are used to assess the quality of manuscripts. One of them is age, one of them is number, but then there are other factors. But then the translators assess the quality of the manuscripts, and then they translate based on the most reliable manuscripts that they have at the time. It would mean that if a newer Bible translation were to come out now, it probably is because these translators have found manuscripts that are more reliable than the other manuscripts that were used to translate previous translations of the Bible. So you would see that in all of those Bibles where some verses are missing, you would see those verses in the footnotes. They would put them in the footnote. They don't remove them completely. They'll put them in the footnote, and there will be an explanation. So you see something like the M text says this, or the NU text does not have these verses. You see those things to say to you that nobody is hiding anything. Nobody is stealing verses away from the Bible. Generally speaking, what is being done is that they are translating according to the best manuscripts that they have, but because they know that other people use other translations that have different manuscripts, they put it out there for you to see that even though we have omitted these verses because it is not found in this manuscript that we are using, which we think is more reliable, it's in the footnote, so you can actually see that these verses are captured in other manuscripts of the Bible. And those verses that are claimed to be missing, those verses do not do anything to Christian doctrine. Even if those verses were actually missing, Christian doctrine will still stand. Everything we believe as Christians is not affected by any of those missing verses, in quote. Everything we believe as Christians is not affected, is not touched by the fact that certain verses are removed from Scripture. Now, even though those verses are not removed from Scripture, those verses are not missing, those verses do not do anything to Christian doctrine. And so we can have high confidence in the Bible that we have. There are people who say that the Bible has been changed in translation transmission, that what was given is not what we have, the Bible is corrupt. Well, anytime anybody says that to you, you need to ask them for the evidence for that view, because there is no shred of evidence to suggest that the Bible that we have is corrupt. I hope this helps you to have more confidence in the Bible that we use, so that you can know that what we use is trustworthy. The Bible is God's standard, it's God's revelation to us, and it cuts across all times and all ages. See you next week.